Good evening. I'm David Levine. I'm co-chair of Science Writers in New York. My guest is Gideon Gil. He's the managing editor of STAT, overseeing STAT's investigative journalism, special projects, and science coverage. He joined STAT at its founding in 2015. He previously was the Boston Globe's health and science editor for a decade and a hand in 3 Pulitzer Prizes. Tonight we're going to talk about Augmented, which is a Nova production that was made by STAT for GBH, which is the Boston Public Television. It was written by Gideon, Heather Mcdonald, and Matthew Orr. It was produced by Gideon, Heather Mcdonald, Matthew Orr, and Dominic Smith, and was directed by Matthew Orr. The executive producers for Nova are Julia Court and Chris Schmidt. Okay, so I can talk a little bit about this. This tells the story of Hugh Herr, whose legs were amputated below his knees in 1982. After a climbing accident, from his knees down to the floor, he is completely artificial. And he told NPR, my limbs that I wear have 12 computers, 5 sensors, and muscle-like actuator systems that enable me to move throughout my day. Besides wearing artificial legs, he designs them as well at MIT's Media Lab, Biometronics Corporation, where he's a director. So Gideon, how did you, okay, so STAT is not known for making films. This is your first film. So how did you decide to make a film? And you said you spent 5 years on this.
Yes, so first of all, thank you very much for having me, David, to talk about the film. I'm really excited to do that, and wonderful to be here. So actually this is our second film. This is our first feature-length film, but we had previously made a film about the opioid epidemic called Run-In. And it was set in Somerville. And it was actually, it was narrated by one of our multimedia team, a guy named Alex Hogan, who grew up in the Boston suburb of Somerville. And he kept coming to work and asking for days off to go to funerals. And it turned out that lots of guys he grew up playing hockey with were overdosing and dying of opioid overdoses. And so he told that story in a 30-minute film called Run-In. And I, as you learned about this story from reading a short item in the short story in the Boston Globe, our sister publication, that talked about this guy from Maine named Jim Ewing, who underwent a new kind of amputation surgery. And I thought it would make a really interesting short video. And at the moment, when we set out to do it, our intent was to make another short video, and the more we got into the story and the more Matt Orr, who at the time was our director of multimedia at STAT, got into the story, we just thought it was so compelling and there was so much to tell that there was no way to squeeze it into 20 to 30 minutes. And so it ended up what it is now. What I found really compelling about it was one, the science, but also the backstory of Hugh Herr, who unfortunately we would have seen in that trailer. He was a precocious rock climber when he was a teenager, and was on magazine covers and really had a national reputation. And then at age 17, he and a buddy decided to go ice climbing on Mount Washington in the last week of January. And this was in 1982. There were no cell phones. They didn't bring a compass with them. And a sudden blizzard came up. Anyone who knows anything about Mount Washington, the weather changes there every 5 minutes. And they were about 800 feet up from where they started their climb, and this blizzard came up, and it was a whiteout conditions. They got totally disoriented and ended up wandering into this vast wilderness area where they were lost for 4 days, and they were basically dead. I mean, they had given up. There had been a rescue party, but it had not found them. And then this hut manager was out snowshoeing and just sees these tracks in the snow. She thought it was a moose. She follows the tracks and comes upon them and rescued them. And by that time, they were both had serious frostbite, and Hugh ended up having both his legs amputated below the knees. He was despondent, but he sort of turned this tragedy into he was handed these prosthetic legs by the doctors, which connected to his residual limb with a plaster of Paris connector. So this was 1982. It was, early computers were around. We had, technology was advancing, but not for prosthetic devices. And he got very frustrated by that. He ended up using sort of the skills he'd learned in high school woodshop classes, fashioning new prosthetic limbs for himself that he could use to actually go back climbing. Anyway, he was an indifferent student up to that point, and then he decides that he wants to become an engineer and build limbs. And fast forward to today, and he's a professor of bioengineering at MIT, and he is building state-of-the-art limbs. So that whole story was fascinating, and so that drew us to it as well as I said, as the idea that amputations surgery had basically not changed at least since the Civil War era, and it's a kind of just a very brutal surgery. They just, as most of you have probably seen those early photographs of people having amputations during the Civil War, of soldiers just having their legs cut off with saws. And, basically that's what they're still doing in most cases, is you cut the leg off, you cut the muscles, you cut the nerves, and then they kind of fold it, they create a flap by folding it up, but nothing is reconnected. And in this procedure that is now named for Jim Ewing, the first patient, they figured out that by reestablishing the connections of muscles, so muscles work in pairs, and you have one muscle contracts and it pulls the other muscle and stretches the other muscle, and vice versa. It's called agonist antagonist pairs. And that action is actually really important for our sense of proprioception. And this is our ability to, I shut my eyes, I can touch my nose. I know where my nose is. And that's because of proprioception, which is that your joints, when they move and when your muscles contract, they're sending signals to the brain about the location of that limb, that joint in space, how it's moving, and with what force. And in the conventional way of doing amputations, that sensation is lost. And as a result, people with conventional amputations, when they put a prosthetic limb on, they have no idea where that limb is in space. With this new procedure, patients are able to sense where their limb is in space, and they have a sense. When you have an amputation, you still have this sense of a phantom limb, that it's there. And with this surgery, Jim Ewing and other patients who we've talked to and you see in the film talk about feeling as if they have their foot back. And they talk about it as if it's their foot. It gives them this sense of wholeness again, of being restored to wholeness. And so that was very exciting to hear, to talk to a patient, to people like Jim, and hear him talk that way about it.
Joe said he can show the film, so.
Oh, great. Okay. Now that I've just
described it. Let's try it.
I wanted to go to Mount Washington to do one of the ice gullies, but go to the top of the mountain. And Hugh said, sure, glad to do that.
They didn't have a map and compass, and they were using the wind. They realized they were lost.
Hugh fell through the ice and was soaked from the waist down.
Lying in the hospital with my limbs amputated, my future was just a black hole.
This is a gentleman who really has reinvented bionics. Professor Hugh Herr from MIT.
Here you can see my legs, 24 sensors, 6 microprocessors, and muscle tendon-like actuators. I'm basically a bunch of nuts and bolts from the knee down. I'm a bionic man, but I'm not yet a cyborg.
For hundreds, thousands of years, amputation has been viewed as a procedure that's done when there are no other options. Fundamentally, the surgery hasn't changed since really the Civil War era.
We're on our way to Boston to say goodbye to my left foot.
How are you feeling emotionally?
I am absolutely terrified.
We hope that we'll be able to demonstrate the first real time that a robotic limb has been integrated with a patient's sense of self via proprioceptive sensation.
Proprioception is our ability to sense the world around us. It's the way that we know our joints move in space, how fast they're moving, how hard they're pushing, how stiff they are.
If we are able to come up with a better way of doing amputation that fully augments a person's ability to achieve increased levels of function, that is a much different package.
It's really cool to feel it through my knee. Literally within minutes of having it all connected, it starts becoming part of me.
So those spinal level circuits are still active. He feels enough feedback to the spinal cord that everything triggers naturally. I believe the individual will be able to design their own physicality, design their own cognition and emotional experience, will be able to sculpt their own identity. Society is obsessed with this idea of a normal human, a normal body, a normal mind. We're so convinced that normalcy is the pinnacle of capability. That's now collapsing, it's breaking down. I think in 20 years, limb amputation will not be a disability, and there'll be several dimensions that are actual augmentation.
It's much better with sound.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I learned in being involved in this movie as somebody who's grew up with a ink-stained wretch of in working in newspapers. Telling stories with not just words but sound and images it's like playing 3D chess, and it's really fun when you've just been working with text for your whole life.
Well, I think the amazing thing is that these guys who have had the amputations have gone back to mountain climbing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And interestingly, so in the film, we show them in the lab, and they're working with really kind of the next generation prosthetic limbs that are, that are able to move and like, up, the joints can move up and down, side to side, much more mobility than commercially available prosthetics right now. But even using just the off the shelf commercial ones, amputees with the state of the art, with what's available, are able to do quite a bit. And so, so both Jim Ewing and actually Hugh Herr, who hasn't had this operation, because of the prosthetics that are available, are able to do quite a bit. But with the operation, it allows it, as I talked about earlier, amputees have they don't have to be constantly looking down at their feet to know where their leg is. So you're able to move much more normally, and to do more daring things.
Well, I first heard about phantom pain, and also there's a famous experiment where a person who's lost his hand puts his hand in a box, and there's a hand there, and starts to stimulate the senses of having a hand, even though it's an artificial hand. And it's been done a long, for many years, and it kind of shows, to me, it talks about resiliency, but also the fact that our body has a sense that even though it's not a real leg, a real hand, that it's still there, and there's some connection that we can make.
Well, your brain still and that's one of the things that was shown by this. Your brain still has connections in there. There's still a part of the brain for that limb, which is why you have that phantom limb pain. And in many people with conventional amputations, it's pain. Mm-hmm. With the new procedure, it's sensation. So there's a difference between pain and then a sensation that it's there. That's functional, as opposed to the pain, which is dysfunctional.
So as a writer, I think so tell us how you got involved in the production. How did it get to Nova? Because it's, and also you can watch this. It was last week, last Thursday, but you can watch this on demand on PBS. You can watch it on their app. So
yes, no, it's at pbs.org/Nova, and you can see it there. You can stream it, and it's also on their app. Yes, and so like I said, we, at STAT, since our start, we've always felt that storytelling needs to be. We need to take advantage of the full menu of options with digital, as a digital site, and part of that is video, and so we've always liked telling stories with video. Most of the time they're shorter, and as I said, we got into the story and just felt it needed to be a longer film, and so we did the shooting. Most of the shooting was done starting in 2017. We started in like late winter 2017, so essentially 5 years ago. And and we shot most of it into this, finished it in a summer of 2019. And we actually went to this conference. It's called SMASH. You may have heard of it, or but it's a conference for filmmakers who have science films, and it was actually held in Boston at WGBH in the fall of 2019. And they had it was like speed dating, where you could go, you signed up, and you could go and pitch your film to various streaming services, like everything from Netflix, Nat Geo, Nova, everybody was there, and lots of European outlets. And so we did some speed dating, and we actually we didn't, the Nova's dance card was full up. We couldn't get on their dance card. So, but at the end, we kind of went up and talked to the Nova producer who was there, and told her about the film, and she was very interested and said, well, when it's finished, send it to us. And so we did. They started talking to us in late 2019, early 2020. And then, of course, what happened in early 2020. The pandemic comes along, and we and they were just full bore focused on COVID. And so the film kind of sat for a year. And it was actually good, because when Nova first talked to us, they wanted to, most Nova shows are an hour. Most of the programming they do and the films they do are an hour long. And actually, so that means the film is 52 minutes. So they originally came to us and said, we're interested, but you got to cut it to 52 minutes, which it was an 82-minute film. That's taking 30 minutes out of it. It would have changed the film entirely. But fortunately, in that year, in December of 2020, Chris Schmidt, one of the co-executive producers at Nova, and Julia Court, the other executive producer, emailed us and said, we watched the film again, and we want to take the full-length version. And so then we began negotiating again, and we finally reached an agreement last fall, and that led to airing it. But they were very enthusiastic about it, and it's really thrilling to see that Nova now is open to running feature-length films. It's a great opportunity for filmmakers.
So now you had the example that all the writers who pitched to you had, where the dance card was full. You don't get an answer. You had to beg for an answer. And they say, we like it, but we'd like you to change it completely.
Yeah.
Cut it. And so I'm glad you had that experience. They have a little more sympathy to all the writers who are pitching you. We know that you write to someone and said, please pitch us, and you do, and you hear nothing back. So that's a good thing. So there's a question here, so I'm going to read it, and then for the people who are listening in, I always appreciate people listening in. Please put your questions in the Q&A box, and I'll read them too. So I authored a book entitled "Shattered Nerves: How Science is Solving Modern Medicine's Most Perplexing Problem," which is about neural processes, published by Johns Hopkins University Press in 2006. My book covers the gamut of devices implanted in the body to replace the functioning of damaged nerves. This includes cochlear and brainstem implants, retinal implants, brain-computer interface, and most importantly, the subject of this talk, functional electric stimulation implants that include standing and walking implants. So I wonder if Mr. Herr has any such implants or interface with his prosthetic legs.
So his prosthetics that he uses are motorized, and they have a microcomputer in them. They're not actually the ones that Hugh uses are not. They don't have implants into his brain or his muscles. The ones though that the patients, Jim Ewing and others who are part of this clinical trial are using, does have sensors that run from the prosthetic limb into the residual limb. and they pick up movements of the muscles, and that gets translated into movement that sends an electrical signal to the microprocessors in the prosthetic limb, causing the limb to move in the way that the muscles would be moving the patient's actual foot. Does that make sense? So it's essentially brain controlled, because your brain is signaling your motor cortex is signaling your muscles, move that foot, that phantom foot that is there. And so the muscles are moving in as they would if you still had your real foot there. The electrodes pick up that movement, and the computer reads it and moves the prosthetic foot in the same way that the patient intends. And you actually, in the film, Jim Ewing says, I feel like my foot is moving in the way that my brain wants it to move, and which is really quite remarkable. And what's cool about it is you don't need you don't need to implant a microarray into the person's brain. It's reading it from the muscle movements. And they're continuing to develop the technology, and they're trying all sorts of things so that the fidelity and the resolution of the ability of the leg to sort of pick up the movements or the signal is high. They're trying to make that a higher resolution. So one of the things they've tried is actually implanting magnetic beads into the muscle. This is what they're doing with animal experiments, and then reading the movement of those magnetic beads to signal the limb how to move. And where they're headed with this is, I think there'll be like, a Bluetooth device. They won't even be wired in. There'll be just a Bluetooth that picks up these signals and tells the legs how to move. I hope I answered the question.
I think you did. So, I mean, I don't think I've ever had any desire to go mountain climbing, to be on Mount Washington. Plus, if I did and had this experience, I'm not sure why I would go back. So I kept saying that these guys are actually going back. So
yeah, it's a passion for them. I
understand.
Yeah, they talk about it as a mystical experience, being on the face of these mountains.
So this happened to Hugh when he was pretty young. So he went back to school for this training.
Yeah. So he, like I said, he'd been an indifferent student, and he went to college in Pennsylvania, and then he got a PhD in physics, I believe, at Harvard, and then went to MIT, and so he really bore down and figured, and really has pushed forward the whole field of prosthetics.
So how many people have had the procedure?
There are now about 30 people who have had it. About 30 people who've had the procedure on their legs, most of them below the knee, but some, I think 6 above the knee. And then there have been, as of last fall, there had been 4 people who have had this procedure done on their arms. And we actually made a short video of about 10 minutes about the first patient who had this done on his arms, a guy named Jerry Majetich, who was serving in Iraq in 2005 and had was blown up in an IED explosion. And he was an intelligence officer and was targeted, and lucky to have survived, but suffered severe injuries, and including to his left hand. And he lived with this terrible pain from 2005 until 2020, when he had the surgery done. And there's an interesting thing that's happened that it was alluded to in the clip there, which is that amputation surgery has long been seen as a last resort. It's like the last thing you would want to do is cut the limb off and put a prosthetic on it. And that, the feeling was that prosthetics were just, they basically weren't much better than the old peg leg. And why would you do that to a person? And it's better to just, deal with the pain. But there's been a real shift in thinking now that the prosthetic devices are better. And now with this, I think this new amputation procedure is hastening that in many cases, it's better to cut it off and replace it with, and so you get rid of the pain and you have a much more functional limb. It's really remarkable I learned a lot doing this, just how much these limbs can allow people to do. The problem right now, though, is that many of the more advanced motorized robotic limbs are extraordinarily expensive, and many insurers won't cover them. And so that's a big issue right now for people with amputations.
I'm kind of fascinated. So I know Matthew used to work for you, and now he went on his own and directed this. So what was it like to basically produce a movie and kind of hope that it might be shown? And also, because you didn't have much experience producing films.
Right, it's my first crack at it.
Yeah.
I mean, I was blessed to work with, filmmaking is a real team sport. And first of all, Matt Orr, the director, I mean, he deserves all the credit for this film. He's a brilliant filmmaker. He was actually he was the first videographer ever hired by the New York Times. He's just just has wonderful ability to tell stories with images. And so he was the one driving this project. We all worked for Matt. And but the other, I also want to mention Dom Smith, one of the things that you saw some of this in the clip we showed are the graphics in this film. And Dom was also at STAT. He isn't right anymore, but he worked in our multimedia team, very talented guy. And was doing motion graphics for us at STAT, but he did all of the graphics, and the whole look of the film is very much owing to Dom's work. And then Heather Mcdonald, our other writer and producer, is extraordinarily talented. She has actually had worked on a film before, so wasn't as much of a newbie, and having her experience was really invaluable to the project. But I think for me it was a really incredible learning experience to learn. I mean, there's some similarities to the storytelling in film and in kind of long form, more traditional long form journalism. But you have to be constantly thinking about how it looks and sounds, and that's something that as a writer you try to create these impressions with words, and in film you use less, fewer words the better. Often you want to let the drama happen.
So there's a question here. Is the value of a prosthetic to the patient its function or its experience?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but I'll try to answer what I think it is. I mean, I think the value of the so one of the things that happens with that was getting around to saying was that the prosthetics have advanced to a point where they were patients having conventional amputations can't make full use of their capabilities because of the issues I've talked about. And so that's what really led to this happening. And so it's the combination, it's not just the prosthetic, it's the combination of the prosthetic with this new way of doing amputation surgery that allows patients to make full use of these limbs. And so they're able to, they're able to make more complete use of the functionality of the limb. And to feel as if, you know, it really, they're able to move in a way that's much more like somebody with their their natural biological limb has. One of the things that happens is that when you walk up and down stairs without thinking, when you're walking down a stair without thinking, your toes bend down to find the step below. And similarly, when you're climbing, your toes move up without you thinking about it. So you'll see in the film, this actually happens with once Jim Ewing, when he's walking up and down stairs, you actually see the foot without him thinking about it, actually makes those movements. And it's all unconscious. And that's that kind of functionality is made because the brain signals are coming through to the limb in this way.
There's another question. Will this technique be likely to work less well for people who need amputations, but due to diabetes-related nerve and blood vessel damage?
That's a great question. Yeah. So right now, it's been used in patients who've had traumatic injuries. Right. And there is a course of which there are many, and many of them are soldiers from our too many wars, and much of the research is actually funded by the Department of Defense. But there is, the whole, there's many people with diabetes who have lost limbs because of circulation and nerve problems, and they haven't tried this yet in that population. And there are, the current way of doing it may not work so well in that group, but it's something they're working on. But yeah, that's a concern right now. The other thing that they're working on is to be able to take somebody like Hugh Herr, who had a standard amputation many years ago, and do a revision surgery that would allow them to then gain the function that somebody like that Jim Ewing now has. And that they've actually done that with one patient so far.
So here's a question. Did the soldier you spoke about have the amputation surgery that allowed him to have this technique? Where was his amputation surgery, and do surgeons regularly know of this technique?
Yes, so his surgery was done at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, where they've done two of the hand procedures, and two of them had been done at Brigham and Women's Hospital here in Boston, where most of the leg procedures have been done. And I should say that the Hugh Herr, actually, this was a team effort. Hugh Herr worked with a physician named Matthew Carty at Brigham and Women's, who the two of them together really came up with this new way of doing amputation surgery. I'm sorry, what the second part of the question, David, was?
Do surgeons regularly know of this technique?
Yes. So word is beginning to spread. And in fact, I did a panel with Dr. Carty last week where he said in the last, few months, surgeons in a number of places around the country have started doing it. And they've published a number of papers about the work, and they've presented on it at conferences, and it is starting to get around. Yes.
One thing, when you were talking about the soldier, that a lot of medical advances have come out of war, because basically there are, I guess the mobile hospitals that, MASH talks about, that they had to improvise a lot of times. So, do you see this will this be increasingly used by the Army?
Yeah, so the Walter Reed is very, very interested in this way of doing things. So they're definitely, and they're definitely going to be doing more of it. And so I think, yes, I think soldiers are probably the biggest immediate population that will be benefiting from this. One of the things that the film also addresses, and the reason it's called Augmented, is because as Hugh says in that clip we watched, he says normalcy is not the pinnacle of human capability. That's breaking down. And in 20 years, limb amputation will not be a disability, and there will be several dimensions that are augmentation. And by which he means that the technology is such that people who have these prosthetic limbs with this surgery will be able to do things better than, they'll be able to maybe jump higher or be stronger or run faster than you and me with our, and Hugh says with boring, natural biological limbs. And this he has this sort of vision of the future that people will, as he says in there, will be able to sculpt their own physicality. And he talks, this is in the film, but he talks about that a couple of decades hence, what people will be much more interested in watching the Paralympics than the boring old regular Olympics, because people in the Paralympics will be able to do things way more exciting than anybody in the regular Olympics. And so it's an interesting vision to think about what that might mean for society when you have a class of people who are now, no longer are they disabled, but they are more abled than you and me, David. And not that we're particularly athletic, but what does this mean in terms of, athletic competition? What does this mean in terms of who gets jobs and that sort of thing? So it's something that we raise in the film, and I think is worth thinking about.
I'm a tennis player, and I was driving in Florida, and I saw this big sign, wheelchair tennis tournament. And so I pulled up, and the head of the U.S. National Tennis Center was there, and she said, "You got to see this." And she said that the only difference in the game was that the players were allowed to get 2 bounces, but the person who was the best at it could get it on 1 bounce.
Wow.
And this year there was actually a male player who won all 4 of the Grand Slams, which Djokovic was trying to do last year. He won all 4 majors in 1 year. And, obviously he didn't get the ratings. It's not, these people are, they're not faster than, someone like Rafael Nadal or Djokovic or Petra Kvitova, but it's amazing to watch that these people, and most of these people never picked up a racket until they were injured.
Yeah. Well, so, in Hugh's vision, these people will have they'll have legs that allow them to do that.
Right.
And beat Djokovic and Rafa Nadal.
And legs that won't get sprained and legs that won't get tired. And
Yeah.
yeah.
You know, and he sort of half in jest, I think, talks about, you know, people will want to have their legs amputated so that they can have these capabilities. So,
well, there's a TV show called The Humans, and it was about people who had kind of servants who lived with them who were, you know, babysitters, and the humans actually got jealous of the robots because the robots never get tired, they never complained, they did what they had to do.
yeah.
Great babysitters, obviously. And it was a very interesting show because the people seem to like the robots better than they seem to like the humans. So
Yeah.
do you see that we're blending towards a society eventually that will have, you know, regular people and then enhanced people?
Yeah, I think that's definitely where things are headed. I mean, that's, you know, when you talk about cyborgs, these are like people who are human machine mashups, and the technology is getting there, you know, and so it's a question that, you know, when you see what's possible in this story, it's not far-fetched to imagine that day is coming when there will be people, you know, cyborgs walking around among us, and so I think it will raise some difficult questions and some interesting questions about how we as a society adjust to that.
So I have another question. Who is advocating with the insurance companies to cover this for ordinary people versus soldiers who have a very huge support network with wounded warriors? He said there's basically no support or advocacy system for regular people.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, people with disabilities who are, and their advocacy groups who are advocating for this, but they don't have a lot of political power. And so it's a big issue for that needs somebody to advocate for it.
Okay. Is the issue of phantom pain different with these new limbs versus today's standard amputation?
Yes. So many of the patients who have had this procedure, including Jim, say that they don't experience phantom pain, and the reason that is when you think about it is, so the conventional amputation, the muscles, they create like a flap of muscle and they fold it up. And so, and that's what forms the flap at the bottom of your limb that then fits inside a prosthetic device. And when that signal goes back to the brain reads that as if like my leg is like, you know, at right angles to the you know, the foot is at right angles to the leg, and that causes the brain to feel like something's out of whack, and that's, you know, that's what phantom limb pain appears to be. And so by connecting muscles the way they are in a normal physiology, you in theory ought to be able to tackle that, take care of that issue. And so, and in fact, that's what, you know, Jim Ewing does not have phantom limb pain. He and a number of the other patients talk about not having that. So it does seem to, you know, like I said, it's still experimental, so the jury's still out on it, but anecdotally, it does seem to be dealing with that issue.
Now pain is a very big business. You watch any show at night, there's a lot of, or CNN or any of these, there's tons of advertisements for pain. I know that there's a procedure called radio frequency ablation, which they used to give to people who had heart surgery, and the nerves would start hurting them, so they would ablate the nerves. And they started using that for people's backs who were in accidents, and also for people who had neck pain. And I was in an accident, and I had terrible pain in my neck, down my arm, and he said, you're really getting, the nerve is like giving a false signal, has a false signal that there's jeopardy. And that's why it's firing off, and that's why you're getting the pain. So he's going to kill the nerve. It's hard to kill all of them, but he can kill a lot of them. And it was very, very interesting, way of it. So I think pain management is there's been a lot of books, the Pain Chronicles written by a friend of mine. I was New York Times #1 bestseller. Let's get back. How much effort is being devoted to making the new prosthetic limbs appear like natural limbs rather than like machines?
Well, it's interesting because many of the patients actually like this, the kind of space age look of these limbs, and so there hasn't. I don't think there's been a lot of work on that. Although, as I understand it, you can get legs. So I don't know that the motorized ones you can, but there are prosthetics that are made to look more natural. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I don't know if the more, the motorized ones with the microprocessors come that way.
Okay, so that was the last question. So I want to thank you for your time. Now, I know that, as you said, the last 2 years, STAT has been leading the way in covering COVID. Is this starting to die down as the COVID rates go down and the vaccines are here, or are we still going to have, this week, last 3 days or through several weeks, there's been, riots in New Zealand over mask mandates, and which is like, New Zealand's a very polite country, and I was surprised. And also in other countries, there have been problems. Denmark completely opened up, and their COVID rates have gone skyrocketing.
Yeah.
Hong Kong is thinking of going on lockdown again. So a lot of people think the COVID story is over, but it's really not.
Yeah, no, there's exhaustion, among the public, and there's exhaustion among journalists. There's a certain sense of sameness to some of the stories that are getting done. And so I think the challenge for us is to continue to look for, the important stories that have to be told. But it's going to be with us for a long time. We don't have the same number of people devoted to it as we did 2 years ago or a year ago, but we're still, very focused on it. And, we're definitely trying to cover a lot other things than COVID, and we've been expanding our staff, so that's allowed us to do that, actually without too much diminution of our COVID coverage.
I realize when journalists start posting their Wordle results that they're moving, they're a little lighter in tone, and so anyway, so March 17th, I'm going to be speaking to a man who has a startup, and it's about there's been no new drugs to treat depression for many, many years, and pharmaceutical companies are not even putting any money into it. So he thinks that there are better ways to do it by understanding the entire brain and going in a different way. So he'll be my guest on March 17th, and then we'll see what we're going to do after that. Anyways, again, I want
to ask him about psychedelics.
I will definitely ask. It's very interesting. I mean, I think ketamine is very interesting. I mean, you know, I think the golden, to me, that, you know, you take a Xanax for anxiety, it works in 15 minutes. It would be great if we had something that works that fast for depression. I mean, ketamine does, but you have to go to a lab and you have to, you know, get an IV drip and do it for, you know, several weeks. And we don't have any over the, you know, just a prescription pill that you can take that works, you know, right away. I mean, the problem with antidepressant drugs is you don't know for 3 or 4 weeks if it works. And if it doesn't, you have to wash out and wait 2 weeks to start another one. And then you don't know if that's going to work either. So it is a big need, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to thank Gideon Gil, who's the managing editor of STAT. If you don't know STAT, it's online. It's a great publication. You have great writers. I've interviewed several writers from STAT, Ed Silverman, and I'm trying to think who else I've interviewed, but several people from STAT. And as you said, you can watch Augmented on PBS.
Yep, PBS.org/Nova.
Yeah, it is almost 90 minutes. I was fascinated the entire time. I think you will too. And Hugh Herr is quite a charming and clever guy, and looks like he's giving an advanced TED talk. You know, so it was kind of great. Anyway, Gideon, great to see you. I hope to see you in person, maybe in Austin. And
I'll be there.
okay, and stay safe, and everyone else out there, and of course you. And talk to you soon.
Thanks very much, David. It's been a real fun conversation.
It has been. Okay, take care. Good night.
Bye.